Originally, I had prepared this pretty teacherly speech for you guys about why fashion matters. But then yesterday, when I was at rehearsals, I got the gentle suggestion, advice really, to throw my notes away and speak to you guys as if speaking to a friend. So, friends, this is what I'd like you to know about me. 7 years ago, I quit my job. At the time, I'd been working for what was probably the most, or the coolest, let's say, magazine and fashion company in my country. I was the editor of the magazine that this brand published, and I was fresh out of university, and I probably had everything that I'd been dreaming about as a student. I had stability, I had a really good salary, I had easy access, a great wardrobe, I had status. But as time passed, all those things that used to matter so much to me, they stopped being as important. You know, I didn't care all that much for the money, as it turned out. I didn't care all that much for stability or even for all those good clothes that I had. Instead, I started to get really frustrated. I was frustrated with all those glossy magazines that you see on the shelves at your newsagents. I bet you know what I mean. The ones that have celebrities on the cover, the ones that write about the latest trends, the ones that compete with each other about having the coolest model and the hottest photographer to produce incredibly glossy, expensive fashion editorials, but that don't seem to pay even half as much attention to the articles that they have about fashion. I started really thinking about what I could do different. I guess I was looking for my voice in a way. I was seeing what I thought was wrong with the fashion industry, and I was starting to ask myself what I could do to make a difference. That's when this idea of Vestoy was first born. I wanted there to be a magazine, a publication that took fashion seriously, that wrote about fashion with the same depth that I could see other magazines writing about art or about architecture. But I didn't want it to be dry or boring. I wanted the visuals to be just as interesting. I wanted the object to feel like something you wanted to keep, like put in your library or keep on your bedside table and return to again and again. I wanted the images and the text to be equally important. And also I'd noticed that there is this academic discipline called fashion studies, where people research about fashion in academies. They are usually anthropologists or sociologists, art historians, even philosophers. But their study about fashion is very far removed from the people who work in the industry. And I wanted somehow to bridge that gap, to bring these people closer together. And one of the first things that I did when I first had this idea of a totally different kind of fashion publication was to put together 10 points, a manifesto of all the things I thought a fashion magazine should be about. I wanted to share 3 of those points with you today. The 3 that I think still feel are the most central to what I'm trying to do with Vestoy. Before I go on actually to read them out to you, I want to also just tell you that this manifesto, 7 years after I first wrote it, I still publish it in every issue of Vestoy. You can find it on our website. I use it as a sort of memory, if you like. Every time I start a new issue, I read it to remind myself what I'm doing this for. And then at the end of every issue, I read it again, and I try and ask myself, did I manage to set out to do what I said I was going to do? And I wanted also to be transparent so that the reader, you guys, hopefully, can look at this manifesto and also read and think and judge for yourselves if you think we managed to do what we set out to do, what we promised to deliver. So, to the points I wanted to share with you. The first one is point number 6. It goes, everything shall be questioned. Nothing is holy. We must always ask why. The second point I wanted to share with you is point number 8. And that point in particular tends to get people from the fashion industry to raise an eyebrow because it's kind of controversial, I guess. It's the point that goes, advertising is forbidden. And then lastly, number 10, which I think is so incredibly important, not just in fashion, but in any discipline. And it's the one that goes, we must work from within the industry, but maintain an outsider's perspective. Because I think that if you stand too far removed from the work that you're studying, which sometimes academics can be at risk of doing, you stop really understanding the subject that you're looking at. But then again, if you're too close to what you're looking at, you risk losing perspective. So I think it's incredibly important to keep this balance, have one foot in and one foot out. When I started Vestoy, when I put the first issue out, I mean, I thought I had prepared myself, for the fact that people who previously had been really keen to receive my business card, when I was at my old, really good, cool job, and that they wouldn't be returning my phone calls quite as quick anymore. I knew that I wouldn't be invited to be sitting front rows at any fashion shows in the foreseeable future. I mean, I thought I'd prepared myself for all that, but boy, it was still hard. I remember, how I was struggling with myself to remind myself, I guess, that my work had value, that I was doing something important. I remember feeling really insecure at first, going to shows and introducing myself, not as Anja from the old job, but Anja from Vestoy, who nobody knew what the heck that was, and then trying to give elevator pitches to people that I would meet outside of fashion shows, and them just looking like big question marks, and me sort of shrinking back. But then, I guess, as time passed, and as I gained confidence, and as I got good feedback from readers, from people around me, even from people in the industry, despite the fact that I was doing something so niche and to the side, that really started to make me relax, I guess. At the beginning, it was tough also because, as I'd set out saying that I didn't want any advertising, I wanted to remain free and independent, I had a hard time finding money to put these books out every year. The first few years, I remember feeling like a beggar with with my hat going to. I remember the first few times going to the printer and the paper company saying, "Please, will you support this project?" Asking all the contributors to contribute for free. But then I got lucky. About 3 years or so ago, I met somebody who introduced me to the head of London College of Fashion. Frances Corner, she invited me for a meeting, and she asked me about this work I was doing with Vestoy, what it was all about. I told her, and I described how I wanted to build bridges between academia and industry and fashion, and she got it immediately. And she offered me support, both a place within the university where I'm now a research fellow, and also enough money every year to put this book out. Vestoy has been going for we're about to finish our 7th issue now. It'll be out in a month or so. Every issue, it works to a theme. I try always to think of themes that maybe you wouldn't connect at first to fashion. So far, we've worked with material memories, with magic, with fashion and shame, power, slowness, and most recently, failure. I wanted to show you a few spreads from some of those issues so that you get a better, hopefully, idea of what makes our approach to fashion different from your average magazine. This spread here is from our very first issue, the one on memories. It's a series taken by an Italian photographer, Carlotta Mainaijo, and she shot her mother wearing her own clothes. And I really like this editorial because it points to what I think is really important and often forgotten in fashion. And that is not to let so much focus be on famous people, but focus more on what clothes mean to regular people, to me, to you. This second spread here is from our issue on magic, and it's written by the perhaps foremost fashion scholar, a woman who in effect invented the discipline of fashion theory in the 1980s. Her name is Professor Elizabeth Wilson. And for this issue, she wrote about clothing as, well, clothes that accrue magical powers almost, clothes as talismans. You might all have, I know I do, like a lucky garment, something you wear and you need like a little bit of extra support. That's what she was trying to pick apart. What sort of clothes become that for us? This spread here is from our issue on slowness. It dealt with time, really, which is such a central and important concept for fashion. But this article in particular I like because it shows a way of dealing with clothes that is quite far removed from the fashion industry. The people you see in the picture are a religious group from America called the Amish. And they haven't changed the way that they dress since probably the end of the 19th century when this group first came into being. They don't use technology, they have no cell phones, they don't drive cars, they don't even have zippers on their clothes. And then this spread here, which is from our most recent issue, the one on fashion and failure. The group of women that you see in the picture, they belong to a group of people called gypsies or Roma people. The Roma people are a very common sight in Europe and has been for a few years now. Typically, they come from Eastern Europe. In Paris, where I live, you see them often. They sit on squares with their whole family on the street begging. And the group is really, they have become extremely contested, controversial in all the countries that they have arrived to. And I guess it's fair to say that they are somewhere at the bottom of the social ladder, and they are very recognizable because of the clothes that they wear. So I wanted to show you this spread in particular, which was written also by a Roma woman, an American scholar. And I wanted to leave it a little bit open for you, just as I wanted to do for the reader, where the connection to failure lies here. Is the failure ours as a culture for having a hard time accepting people, judging people so fast by what they look like? Does the failure lie with the group that has a hard time integrating in society? For you to decide, really. Now that Vestoy has been around for almost 7 years, we've grown and diversified. So whereas I started with one journal every year. We now also have a website. Here, I just pulled up a few examples to give you an idea of the content on the website. And the image you see here is an interview that we did with a priest, a female priest, who talks about the difficulty of finding flattering garments as a woman when you have to wear a very specific uniform. The one in the middle is an interview with a legendary independent filmmaker called Kenneth Anger that made some quite fantastic films in the 1960s and 70s. And for us, he talked about all the costumes in his films, which he made himself. And then here you see an interview that became quite popular. It was an interview I did with 13 different people from the fashion industry, designers, photographers, stylists, businessmen, PR agents. And I asked them all to respond to the question, what's wrong with the fashion industry? I wanted also to show you a couple of images from a more recent part of the Vestoy platform, our live events that I call Vestoy Salons. This one here is the first salon that we ever did. It was for the launch of our issue on fashion and shame. And this one here, it took place at a big art institution in Paris called the Palais de Tokyo. So I'd been thinking at the time about what magazine launches are usually like. In Paris, they are always the same. You have a DJ, he plays some music, you have your drinks, you have magazines in piles. People come, take a copy, it's free, chat a little bit, and then they leave to go to the next thing. Well, I wanted to keep people, and I wanted to make people think differently about clothing. So I was trying to figure out how I could use this format, but turn it on its head. And so I worked with a French actress. Her name is Clémence Poésy. She had a really big network of friends who were also actors and performers. And we invited 20 to come to the event. We didn't tell the regular guests that there would be performers there. And I gave each one of these 20 people a kind of, a role to act out that has something to do, very daily role connected to clothing and social embarrassment. Like the woman you see falling over in the picture, she's wearing heels that are so high that she can't walk properly and she keeps tripping. Or the one with white trousers, she has a price tag that's sticking out of her trousers that she forgot to take off. Or the one at the top, poor woman, she went to the powder room, typically, and somehow her skirt got stuck in her underwear. I wanted really to see, to insert all these people into the regular guests to see how people would react. You know, would they whisper to each other? Would they go up to the actors and tell and help them? What would they do? In fact, they did all of the above. And for me, it was an amazing experience to present clothes in this live way. So much so I decided to do it again, to make it more regularly. This next one is a more recent salon. It also took place at the Palais de Tokyo, in fact, in Paris. And this was part of a 3-day performance festival. So the whole museum was taken over by probably 40 different artists from all over the world. And I knew beforehand that the place would be completely chaotic, filled with movement and noise. And so I wanted to add something really subtle that, again, would make people think differently about clothes. So I started to think, what do people who work in this institution at the Palais de Tokyo, what do they wear? And how does it differ from, how does one group differ from another group? What do the curators dress like? What do the people who sell tickets dress like? What do the guards dress like? And I decided to focus on the guards because, at least at the Palais de Tokyo, well, in fact, in a lot of museums that I've visited, they are the only employees who wear a suit. They're the only employees who wear a uniform. And this uniform, it works on two levels, in fact. It both allows them to blend into the background so that you won't notice them until they step forward and tell you off for touching the artwork or taking a photograph or anything like that. Then they have power. They have this very interesting relationship, both being visible and invisible, empowered and disempowered. So what I did was, I again worked with an actor. You can see him here, Noël. He was employed for these 3 days to work as a guard, just like all the others. But instead of wearing the uniform, he wore a body-painted uniform. And I was hoping that by wearing something that was, as you say in French, a trompe-l'œil, like something that at first you don't notice the difference and then you do a double take. I was hoping that in that way I would call attention to this otherwise largely ignored group within the museum. And it was so funny because when during these 3 days, at the very top of the stairs where Noël is standing, the probably most important exhibit was taking place. So I would see people rushing to get there and passing Noël and not even noticing what he looked like to get up to the second floor. And then when they came down again, they would see him and they would do this total double take. And they would go up to him and ask him, "Are you an artwork? Who are you? Why are you looking like that?" Then I wanted to show you another Vestoy salon, one that is really close to me and one that is ongoing. I've done it two times so far. Once at the Fondation Galerie Lafayette in Paris, and once at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And next year, I plan it again at the Tate Modern in London. This one I call the Vestoy Storytelling Salon. The setup is always the same. Handful of fashion professionals who've worked in the industry for between 30 and 40 years. So people who are a little bit older and who have dedicated their whole lives to the practice of fashion. I invited designers, stylists, muses, models, set designers, wide range of people who have this professional relationship to clothes. But then I worked with each one of them to come up with a really personal and intimate story about the garment that is particularly important to them, something that they have worn that's changed either how they see life or their life. I have a few that I pulled up for you here. One is the designer Jean-Charles de Castelbajac, a French designer that was really famous in the 80s and 90s. He was talking about the cloak that he designed for the Pope, and that made him really think different about the impact you can have as a fashion designer when you expand what you do, not just to be shown on the catwalk, but to be shown for the millions of people who saw what the Pope was wearing when he came to visit Paris. In the middle is the woman who once saved my skin, Frances Corner, from London College of Fashion. She's talking about her wedding dress and how that really changed the way she saw herself as a young woman. And then over here we have another woman called Michelle Lamy, who is the wife and muse of the designer Rick Owens. She was talking about a dress that Rick Owens made for her back when they lived in Los Angeles in the 1980s, when Michelle was a designer and Rick was her pattern cutter. And they were falling in love, but it was a kind of forbidden love because, well, she was his boss and she was much older than him. They were quite different. So they didn't dare talk about what they were feeling, but this dress that he made for her just spontaneously and presented her as a gift, it became the catalyst and the thing that made them able to admit to how they were feeling. And, well, now they've been married, I think, almost 20 years. So, but there's this one story that was told in Paris that still resonates with me, even though years have passed since I heard it, and I wanted to share it with you. So this story was told by a woman called Irene Silvani. She has worked as the designer Yohji Yamamoto's right-hand woman, I mean, for so many years, several decades. And she came to the storytelling event wearing this coat, this great big winter coat, black, big. And she told me and the audience that this coat was a gift from Yohji Yamamoto, something she'd received maybe 15 years or so before. I mean, today she's a woman in well, more than 70 years old. So she's had this coat for a while, and when she got it, Yohji told her that this coat was magical, special. He didn't elaborate or explain why or anything like that. He just said this, gave it to her, and she received it gratefully, and she started to wear it, and she noticed how whenever she put it on, she would feel stronger, like protected. And then it slowly dawned on her what her boss and mentor might have intuitively known or felt when he gave this coat to her. Because, you see, Irene, she was born in Cannes, in the south of France, during the Second World War. Her family was Jewish, and her father was a diamond dealer. And one day, this man came to Irene's home, and he said that he wanted to have a meeting with her father. He wanted to do business. I mean, everybody knew how difficult the situation was for Jewish people at the time. So Irene's mother tried to warn her husband, don't go, stay at home. But the family needed money, and so he went anyway. And he never came back. And years passed, and Irene and her mother, they moved to Paris, and the only thing that they had left of her father was this coat, this winter coat that he'd left behind. And you know how clothes that you have worn for a long time, you know, they take on the shape of your body, you know, on the elbows, or it gets worn in places where you use pockets a lot or whatever. So this coat, obviously it became precious. Eventually the war ended, and Irene and her mother, they would go every day to a hotel on the left bank in Paris called Lutetia, because there they would publish lists of all the people that had been found, located, dead or alive after the war. But Irene's father's name, it was never on any one of those lists. More time passed, and the family moved again, and somewhere in all these moves and changes, this coat, it was lost. But anyway, there was this one day when Irene was older, a teenager already, and out of the blue, there was a knock on the family door one morning. So she went and she opened the door, and outside was this man that she'd never seen before, and he said, I was at Auschwitz with your father. And he told her that he and Irene's father had become close over the years that they'd spent there, and that they'd passed the time by telling each other stories about their families, you know, the people that they loved and had left behind. And he said that in 1945, when the camp was liberated, they had fled together in the chaos that ensued. But that as they were running away into the forest, a group of German soldiers, also trying to escape, run away, had caught up with them. And the soldiers, they had guns, and they shot everybody in this group that was trying to escape. Everybody died, except this one man. And he survived just because Irene's father had fallen on top of him, covering him, convincing the Germans, the Nazis, that he was dead. he felt that he owed his life to Irene's father. And he'd promised himself that whenever he could, he would locate his family and tell them what had happened. When Irene told this story, so many years later, as an old woman with her own children, and when she described how somehow, in some unfathomable, mysterious way, this coat that she had received as an old woman from her mentor and her boss had taken on the properties of this coat that her father once wore and loved. Something just kind of clicked for me. It made sense. And I remembered what Elizabeth Wilson was writing, and I realized what she meant when she talked about the magical powers of clothes. That's when it really dawned on me. That's why fashion is important. That's why fashion matters. Thank you.